Today we are looking at Swalot. Swalot's a Pokemon I don't think gets enough representation, although I can see why, because its appearance and general vibe, whatever, doesn't really set off any cool or cute flags. It's more of a, niche Pokemon, something for somebody like me who likes the more unconventional Pokemon. Let's make it better so that people can think more about it, huh? What's up YouTube, it's your favorite clout chaser, Oaken64, coming with a new video in my now titled Let's Buff Blank series. For those who are new, I normally split this video into two parts. The first part is where I give the Pokemon more reasonable buffs, where I try to be more conservative in how I increase its stats and move pool. The second part is where I do not use any rules whatsoever and I buff the Pokemon as I see fit. Simple rules, simple solutions. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. Firstly, a brief look into Swalot's competitive history as we tend to do. How good has Swalot been since his debut in Generation 3? Surprisingly, in his debut generation, it was really good in lower tiers. That is, because there was not many defensive walls at the time, it had a niche over the tier's premier defensive Pokemon in Sableye. That was because of its superior bulk, it has access to Yawn, and more notably, Explosion prior to Generation 4. We will see that its wide move pool is a boon to it as it allows it to swap between a vast array of moves as we continue on in the generations. Generation 4 was not so kind to it. Due to Muk dropping down to NU, it had even stricter competition, and it had to find more ways to diversify itself. Thankfully, it has a good support move pool that helps it out, not to mention having a generally diverse mixed move pool to boot. Encore and Yawn were the moves that it had over Muk, in addition to having a better defense stat than it, at the cost of having a lower physical attack and special defense than Muk. It was still a serviceable Pokemon for sure, but still a ways down from being the premier defensive wall in the lower tiers. Generation 5 had pushed down Weezing as well, which gave it even more competition. Unfortunately, that means that Swalot just did not have enough to provide for the metagame. The addition of Eviolite put Roselia on the map as well, which gave it even more struggles. Even as a utilitarian poison type, it lacked reliable recovery in comparison to Roselia's synthesis, and only had Encore to give it a niche. This has stayed consistent with every generation it has been in, until Generation 9, where it is, at the time of this recording. Actually, now that I think about it, I'd have to check again. Well, there you go. Third most used Pokemon. Alright, where was I? Its move pool additions in Body Press, Sword Stance, and Toxic Spikes add up for it to be an extremely defining bond in that tier. With its presence slowly waning through the passage of time, let us see what made Swalot so good in the first place in order to know what to address with its buffs. Swalot is a pure poison type, a good defensive type as it resists key offensive types in Fighting and Fairy. Its weaknesses are Ground and Psychic, two types that are powerful offensively but have major drawbacks in their weaknesses. The commonality of water types and the presence of U-turn being extremely common as is, not to mention that ghost and dark types have gotten better and better over the generations, makes it so that countering those types while team building isn't too big of an issue. Stat wise, it seems like the more balanced version between Muk and Weezing, possessing mixed bulk and offensive, not shining in the offensive or defensive category. It separates itself by having a much wider move pool, having access to Encore, which can punish hazard setters and setup sweepers. The main weakness of Swalot is that it's a jack of all trades, master of none, which leads it to fall to the wayside, as Pokemon that can do a lot of different things stat-wise don't normally tend to be very good. And since Swalot's stats are so low, it can be both bulky and hit hard. Good defensive Pokemon that aren't legendaries or have really high stats seem to have to follow this Venn diagram of sorts, of either being fast and bulky and hit hard. Most of OU's pure defensive mons forego speed in order to have raw bulk, while the ones that have a usable speed and bulk tend to lack the power. I would prefer if Swalot had a usable speed stat in order to set it in line with faster poison type tanks like Tentacool, Quillfish, and Drapion, but unlike them, have the mixed bulk in order to fend off many hits from either side and utilize its wide move pool in order to fulfill its generalist role better. For the more reasonable buffs, we can give it Corrosion, as the ability to poison steel types and opposing poison types is really powerful. As for its stats, I would make its HP 120 just for it to be bulkier against neutral and resisted hits. As for multiple additions, Flamethrower would be amazing as an option to pressure steel types on what is typically the weaker defensive stat, and giving it access to Slack Off would give it stalling potential in tandem with Encore, as you cannot set up against it because it will be able to poison you and stall you with multiple turns, because its Toxic cannot miss under any circumstance. A little tangent before we get onto the Water buffs, but I think it's crazy that Corrosion as an ability is only on one Pokemon that is not particularly well suited to use it because it's offensively oriented, while there's multiple defensive poison types that exist. Heck, I think the best poison types that exist currently in OU are the defensive ones, and none of them get Corrosion, even though that would be a really insane ability. Like, I get it because, you know, Salandit's meant to pierce through metal with its ability with Corrosion and all that because it's also poison and fire type, but man, imagine some other Pokemon getting Corrosion. I was talking earlier about, or I remember talking on Twitter about giving Drapion Corrosion, and maybe in a future video I'll talk about that, but giving more poison types Corrosion would actually be really good, because now there would be a very good reason to stall, even though in Generation 9 they just had nerfed all the healing moves PP all the way down to like what, 5 for everything, except for like one other thing I think, but it's like rest, so it doesn't really matter. Anyways, back to the video. As for my dream buffs, I would add the normal type to Swalot. I know that sounds like really weird without context, but just hear me out. Although it would lose its resistance to fighting, it would gain an immunity to Ghost. Also, Explosion would be Stab in a pinch. As for its ability, I would give it a custom ability called Gut Reaction, where every time it gets hit by an attack, physical or special, it would automatically stack a layer of stockpile, raising its defense and special defense as a result. Also, using the move Stockpile would increase the stack by 2 steps instead of the usual 1. This would allow it to utilize Stockpile actually. I think it would be the first one to actually try to use it, instead of for like funny gimmicky sets. By that logic, it would also be able to utilize Spit Up and Swallow, namely because it gets Stab on Spit Up. Also, it would be able to heal a massive amount because of Swallow, because remember, when you stockpile 3 stages, you heal 100% of your HP. As for its stats, I would keep the base 120 HP like I mentioned earlier, but decrease its attack to 43, raise its special attack to 93, and raise its speed to 85, rounding its base stat total up to 507. Not too high, but not low enough where it feels like it'll get left to the wayside again. Swallow would have a tough time in OU currently because there's too many good ground types. We got Ursaluna, we got Iron Tread, Great Tusk, Lando T came back, but in situations where it can set up, it becomes monstrously bulky. Not to mention its speed set is really high for a defensive Pokemon, and because of that, Pokemon like Great Tusk, Heatran, and Rotom Watch would have to actually consider how many EVs they run just to make sure they can outspeed Swalot, who could also run speed EVs. Its unique role would allow it to have a very unique niche. Even if it doesn't stay in OU, it'll have a very unique niche in general, just because it always gets bulkier after it gets hit by any move, super effective or otherwise, being able to stave off hits, and then you can't switch into the checks because by that point, it'll probably be bulky enough where it will take the hit for its check, and then just fire back with a really powerful Spit Up, or heal it all back with Swallow, and then just switch out to a different Pokemon. It would also have the rare role of being a fast utility Pokemon because of its access to Encore, Yawn, Thunder Wave, and Clear Smog. Because of these moves, Pokemon can't necessarily set up on it because they can become incapacitated because of Thunder Wave and Yawn, and Clear Smog just removes stat buffs entirely, so any setup Pokemon that's slower than Swalot will have to contest with that. Because it's not frail anymore, it will have the ability to stave off many hits, and then you can't just switch into a different Pokemon that isn't a resist, because if you do, then Spit Up is going to do a lot of damage to you. Unless you're a Steel type, or Rock type, or a Ghost type, be very wary of the Pokemon that you switch into. In the lower tiers, I would expect it to be a solid pick. With the power level being decreased, that means it can stomach more hits and fire it back. Its move pool will allow it to be more flexible, body press for physically defensive sets, you can run Flamethrower to punish Steel types, you can run Toxic plus Clear Smog and Protect and Swallow to whittle down setup sweepers as you keep your bulk as long as you stay in, and continuously eat hits. Well, that's the end of this video. I wanted to get the Go-Goat out one as well, but that was going to take a bit longer. School actually started up, so I'm going to have to do that first. In the meantime, I'll be just chilling on my Twitter. If you want to follow me there, you'll see me post art sometimes and never talk about my YouTube channel here for some reason.